Listen to This Week in Money, Saturdays on Internet Radio at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. This week's scheduled guests from Chartworks, Ross Clark. From the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report, Mark Faber. From WolfStreet.com, Wolf Richter. Plus, we'll have a company showcase update from American Manganese CEO and President Larry Ray. Don't miss This Week in Money this Saturday on Internet Radio at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
I'm Kelly Jennings, CEO of Powerband Solutions. Powerband is a cloud-based provider of auction, inventory, and finance solutions that make buying, selling, and financing vehicles more efficient. Powerband Solutions trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol PBX. For more information, please visit us at powerbandsolutions.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He's also an editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. And sorry, your Calgary Flames did not make the NHL playoffs.
No, they didn't. I'm well aware.
There's always next year, as we say in Canuck land. James, President Xi for life, is that good or bad for China?
Well, I suppose it depends on what metric you're going to measure that on. And if you're talking about geopolitical clout of China, I suppose it's more of an inevitability than anything else. But in terms of the freedom and happiness of the Chinese people, I think there's at the very least a big question mark over that. And unfortunately, the way things are playing out in China, with the unveiling of a type of high-tech police state that is truly unlike anything we've seen before, I think there are very concerning issues about the possibility of China turning into really the most nightmarish sort of authoritarian state under President Xi for life. But I think the important thing to note about that title, as people may or may not have known, President Xi has basically eliminated the term limits in the Chinese constitution that would have seen him handing over power at the next election, quote unquote, to the next coronation in 2022. Those term limits have been lifted, so she presumably can and presumably will stay on past his 10 years to 5-year terms that he was previously limited to. But I think the important thing to note is that this is not some sort of big time-honored, centuries-old tradition that's being eroded here. This is really something that's something of an ad hoc title anyway. And the title itself isn't even necessarily all that important because some of his other positions as head of the military, for example, confer a certain power that the president's title alone doesn't really confer. The reason I think that this change has been made is specifically for the geopolitical reasons that the president obviously gets to conduct international negotiations and international relations. And as China steps up as a player on the geopolitical board, I think that's more important than it was, say, under his predecessor or their predecessors in the previous decades. Now that China is a global player, Xi just wants to make sure that he's going to be the one sitting at the negotiating table, as he was just this week, actually, in the first trilateral summit between China, South Korea, and Japan in 3 years. They've just concluded their trilateral summit in Tokyo, where, of course, the big headline issue was the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and talking about how they're going to push for denuclearization. But one of the side issues, maybe not so much a side issue, but something that was discussed there that isn't getting as much attention, is that China, Japan, and South Korea are now drawing closer together on potential trade agreements that are being launched, I think spearheaded by China in an initiative to try to counteract what's going on with, obviously, the Trump troubles that are spearheading their way into the Chinese and American trading relationship. And I think that's causing some consternation in Beijing, and they're looking to counteract that by increasing their economic relations with Japan and South Korea. So there's some big moves afoot. And I think that's one of the reasons why Xi Jinping has taken this President for Life title.
With the easing of tensions so far between South Korea and North Korea, was it China pushing it for real, or was it threats from President Trump?
I think it was a combination of factors, and ultimately, we can't really read the minds of any of these players, but it does seem that this is just the perfect opportunity, assuming that Kim Jong-un and the Korean regime are not suicidal. This is the perfect opportunity for them to take an out and potentially go into a negotiation with a stronger hand than they would have had in pretty much any other conceivable circumstance. So it does seem to there is a certain logic to what's happening now, assuming that every player at the table is acting in good faith and wants to save face. But that is maybe a big assumption to make, obviously, in the wake of the scrapping of, or at least the U.S.'s withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear deal. I would assume that North Korea has to be looking at that development and wondering whether the U.S. really is acting in good faith and will honor its agreements, which is obviously something that's called into question by the way they've withdrawn from that nuclear deal.
Well, they also pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. So
the agreements that the American empire is signing in this day and age don't seem to be worth the paper they're written on, and it would be sad to think that this is all just political partisan posturing. But there is, I think, some element of that, specifically because there is truly no new developments that have necessitated the decertifying of the Iranian nuclear deal. One of the justifications that Trump used, at least in his speech, was the presentation by Benjamin Netanyahu last week of new documents that have been discovered about Iran's nuclear weapons program, which, when you look at it, are actually talking about the nuclear weapons program that existed pre-2004, that were already known, in fact, written about by the U.S. intelligence community in 2007, already declared to the IAEA. This is 15-year-old information. Absolutely nothing new came out of this, but now they're trying to use it as some sort of justification for withdrawing from this treaty. So I think the North Koreans have to be looking at that and realizing that any opportunity in the future to scrap any agreement that's made can and presumably will be used by either the Trump administration or whoever comes along next in the line of succession.
Trump also pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific partnership, although we hear rumors that they may want back in. Have you heard anything?
There are rumors floating around. We'll believe it when we see it, I suppose. Nothing can really be taken for certain in this era. But I think that's another thing that's playing into, obviously China is motivated by these sanctions and the sort of growing trade tensions with the United States to get into an agreement with Japan and South Korea. I think Japan and South Korea are motivated because of the U.S. withdrawal from TPP and sort of withdrawal more generally on the economic sphere. I think they're looking towards their potential bread being buttered from a different side in the preceding decades. And I think there's a certain logic to the Asia Pacific coming together without the United States as a trading partner, which is potentially a huge missed opportunity for the United States, having basically taken themselves out of that equation.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp. Inc., MGI on the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected high-grade gold, including 16.9 meters of 13.58 grams and 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program is planned to further evaluate previously identified subsurface high-grade gold mineralization. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with James Corbett. James, is money still flowing out of China?
Capital controls seem to be doing their thing at this particular time. Obviously, there are still money trying to get out, but I think the more important aspect of what's going on right now is China's attempts to basically grow a domestic market for not only international investors, although there is that happening as well, but also for domestic money to stay within the country. And obviously that's going to be a long process and it's going to take many years, but we're starting to see the beginnings of that. And obviously one of the big things that happened just a couple of months ago was the formal actual launching of the yuan-denominated oil futures contract on the Shanghai Energy Exchange, which did go ahead in March. It's been talked about for many months now, but it has actually started. And that opens up not only, as I say, for international investors. It's an international investment that's they're accepting people buying into those futures contracts in U.S. dollars, but the contracts themselves are denominated in yuan. So this is seen as potentially it could in the future become a global oil benchmark actually denominated in yuan. And that obviously increases the sort of base for yuan as a settlement currency, which eventually one of the knock-on effects will be the growing of domestic investment opportunities as well. So I think they're trying to grow their economy in a way that the capital controls won't be as necessary because the capital won't be flowing out quite as quickly as it is under current circumstances.
How are China's manufacturers dealing with or coping with poor quality steel? Or is that even an issue?
I haven't seen much in the Chinese press about that issue, so I don't know if to what extent that this is a pressing issue for their perspective. But obviously, I mean, talking about things like the Kobe steel scandal here in Japan and the sort of shenanigans that they were pulling in making false information about their security reports about that steel certainly will play into international markets as generally, because that steel from Kobe Steel specifically has been used in a number of different industries, including the airlines and automotive industries. So it is there is something there, but I don't know about specifically from the Chinese perspective. I do know in Japan specifically, we are looking at the breaking of this stretch, this run of GDP growth, which was the longest stretch of GDP growth in 30 years. It looks like, the official numbers I think are being released this week, but it looks like the GDP has actually contracted either between 0.1 or 0.2% from last quarter, depending on which prognostications you're adhering to. But at any rate, there has been a contraction, and part of that is a slump in consumer demand. Household spending has decreased here in the previous quarter as well. So there is something of a cooling off that's happening in Japan as well. Again, how much of that is related specifically to things like the Kobe Steel scandal or what have you, and how much is due to the weather, which seems to be a lot of analysts go to in winter months. So if there's a contraction, it must be due to the weather. But at any rate, there has been a contraction. So there are certainly some knock-on effects that are happening in the Japanese economy.
Didn't Japan also increase their sales tax?
They have not yet. There is a slotted increase from the current 8% consumption tax to 10%. That was put off for a year, and I'm not sure if it is going to be put off again. But now that Abe is in political trouble, the prime minister here is facing a series of domestic scandals, which has really eroded public support to the point where it's not even clear that he's necessarily going to stay on as leader of the party and prime minister of the country in the fall when they hold the party holds their leadership summit. It's not even necessarily clear that he's going to stay on at this point. So given that type of political trouble, it is at least conceivable that he might further extend the reprieve on that the consumption tax raise that's supposed to go into effect here, because obviously that would be another drag on the economy that perhaps isn't needed, just as the economy seems to have been growing out of its slump in the last couple of years.
Is Japan continuing with its negative or zero interest rate policy?
It is for the moment. All bazookas are firing, and as people may or may not know, Haruhiko Kuroda, who is the governor of the Bank of Japan, was brought on to do another term as governor. So it looks like he's going to be staying the course and continuing to do whatever is necessary, as much as is necessary, to keep the economy afloat. And at this point, that does involve ZERP and even NERP in certain circumstances, negative interest rate policy. There, of course, the mythical 2% inflation that they've been targeting for 30 years basically, that never seems to arrive. They keep continuing to say, well, maybe we can get it going, maybe we can get something going, but that does not look like it's going to be happening anytime, certainly not in the near conceivable future, given the GDP contraction that's going on right now and the drag on household spending. So it looks like the Bank of Japan is going to have to continue firing all of its bazookas all at once to try to get anything going, or keep it going, I should say.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
Vatic Ventures Corp is a potash exploration company focused on the Korat Basin in Thailand, the world's largest undeveloped potash resource. Vatic's management has extensive potash exploration and development experience in Thailand. Vatic will have marketing advantage compared to Western producers. Drill program commences this spring. Vatic trades on the TSX Venture, symbol VCV, and on Frankfurt, symbol V8V2. Visit our website, vaticventures.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with James Corbett. James, is China's real estate bubble in trouble?
China is still continuing to go through its urbanization phenomenon, which obviously puts strain on the markets, considering that Beijing wants to clamp down on housing prices and make sure that they don't get out of control. So that still remains, I think, the fundamental part of the Chinese real estate equation at this point. And despite Chinese best efforts to cool down the markets, there's still indications that they haven't really arrived at a long-term solution. There has been a little bit of natural cooling in the real estate market this year so far, but I think the demographic and societal pressures are still going to be there, as the urbanization phenomenon of the 1.5 billion or so Chinese people, with a lot of them moving into the urban markets. It's still continuing to put a lot of pressure on the housing markets there, and to increase the prices overall. It may not be a bubble that's inflating quite as quickly as it was last year, but it's still, I think, going to be heating.
Is China raising interest rates?
That's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. So I would have to see which direction it's going. I do know that there have been some changes in the valuation of the yuan, which obviously is pegged, not exactly pegged to the dollar. It's allowed to float within a rate that is set by the People's Bank of China, and I know that they have drastically revalued that in recent months, presumably as a response to these U.S. Trade pressures, basically as a threat. Well, we can still devalue the yuan if we need to in order to counteract what you guys are doing in terms of your sanctions. So I know that kind of shenanigans is going on. In terms of the interest rate itself, I'm not sure exactly where that's sitting right now.
Is China still printing money like mad?
I believe that still this is fundamentally a debt-fueled phenomenon in terms of the growth that is going on. As I say, they're trying to grow the economy out from underneath this debt bubble, if you want to call it that has grown in the last several years. That did pick up the slack from the downturn in the overall global markets back in 2007, 2008 during that crisis. And it was basically debt money that was used to create the ghost cities and the other types of imaginary demand. But now, obviously, China is trying to switch that out, as I say, trying to grow more of a domestic investment market. And also, of course, with this $1 trillion or so that they're at least slating to put into the development projects that are going to be happening along this Silk Road corridor, I think that ultimately that's where a lot of this money is going to be going in the conceivable future. So it is still, I think, a debt-based phenomenon, but there is real economic productive activity that's happening underlying that phenomenon, real manufacturing, real resources that are needed. So it may be it may start out as debt, but it ends up as real tangible assets, which I think is at least more than you can say than, for example, of the American phenomenon, where obviously all of that trillions ultimately of bailout money went essentially into the coffers of the big banks and didn't really produce very much in terms of real productive economic activity. At least the Chinese are getting something tangible out of their debt bubble.
Is China on board to trade fairly with the U.S.?
That's a very good question. I don't know exactly what that would mean, and I think that your perspective on that would depend on whether you're a Chinese negotiator or an American negotiator. I think the U.S. seems oddly fixated on the trade deficit, but I think that's not the most fruitful way to look at a trading relationship. It depends what is being traded and in what way. Basically, in order to jigger that number, China can basically just start importing, for example, more U.S. oil now that U.S. is becoming an oil exporter. And China obviously has surpassed the United States as the world's largest oil importer. There may be some kind of change in the relationship that could happen there. But again, the question is there the will for that? Clearly, I think China's long-term interests and long-term motivation is to create trading relationships with partners around their neighborhood and really across Central Asia, across Europe, looking for different markets to diversify away from that United States relationship so that at the end of the day, hopefully, and from their perspective, they won't need that relationship so much. But at this time, of course, the U.S. is still an exceptionally important trading partner for China, and I don't think they want to scuttle that. But the question really is what will placate the Trump administration at this point, and I'm not sure it's necessarily clear from the Chinese perspective what they would have to do to comply with the U.S.'s demands, or at least the U.S.'s hopes.
Do you think China will respect intellectual property rights?
They never have, so I don't see why they would start now. Potentially, as a quid pro quo, to adjust the trading relationship and to get rid of some of these sanctions. Maybe they can be forced into some sort of compliance on some of these issues. But again, that's quite theoretical. And I'm not sure that's necessarily the sticking point in terms of the trading relationship at this point. It's certainly something that's often brought up when the U.S. is discussing its trading relationship with China, but I can't imagine that's the fundamental part of what's going on here. So it may be sort of a chip on the poker table as a kind of bargaining chip, but I'm not sure it's necessarily going to be the clinching of the deal. Was North Korea a CIA asset? That's a genuinely good question, and I'd like to know as much as I think anyone else would. There's so many levels of opacity when it comes to the North Korean situation that I don't think, certainly I can't do anything more than speculate like anyone else. I don't have any inside information or knowledge about North Korea and how it's really being run, but there are obviously indications that this regime is not self-sustaining, we'll put it that way. So the only question is what lifelines has it received and from what sources, and obviously some of those sources are going to be secretive and under the table. We know obviously that the Chinese government and the North Korea's relationship with China has been exceptionally important in maintaining its ability to maintain control over the country. But is there a CIA backdoor in there as well? I mean, at least we know it is now open and acknowledged that Pompeo is going over. Obviously, former CIA, soon-to-be Secretary of State, is going over in negotiations as part of the lead up to this summit. But in terms of what historical relationship has existed there, again, I can't really do more than speculate. Will Asian economies benefit if North Korea is no longer a threat? Yes, I think so. Obviously, the lessening of tensions pays the peace dividend in a number of different ways. I think the people who would be nervous about the possibility of peace breaking out on the Korean Peninsula would be the people who have been making a lot of money by selling the fear. And obviously that involves a lot of arms contractors who have been making money hand over fist in the Asia-Pacific region for the last several years, based on the North Korean boogeyman, the threat. Everyone has to start arming themselves to the teeth. And so we've seen obviously South Korea and their THAAD anti-missile system, which supposedly was about North Korea, but I think a lot of analysts see is really more potentially about China. We've also seen, obviously, the buildup of the Japanese quote-unquote self-defense forces, which, of course, is a military, but is not allowed to be called a military because of the Japanese constitution, even though Japan has the 8th largest military expenditure of any nation on the planet. So not bad for a country without a military. But we've seen a vast arming and buildup of the Asia-Pacific region over the last several years, an increase, I think the second largest regional increase in military spending for the last several years has been in the Asia-Pacific region. And a lot of that has been predicated on this North Korean threat, or at least the specter of a threat. So if that is removed from the equation, I think there'd be a lot of defense contractors who will be losing out on that money. But potentially that money could be spent on other things, including building more productive trade relationships between countries here in the region. And who knows, maybe even a North Korea that starts to thaw a little bit from its frozen nature at the moment, as the Hermit Kingdom, perhaps could become some sort of trading partner in various ways with some of the countries here. Again, we don't really know what peace would look like, because it has been 60-plus years now of an actual state of warfare on the Korean Peninsula, although it hasn't exactly been a hot warfare, but still warfare on the Korean Peninsula. So peace can have a lot of different effects, and obviously I think to the overall it will be good. I think just for certain sectors, they will probably be looking to find another boogeyman to use their fear to sell to countries around the region, and I think that boogeyman probably would be China.
What are you hearing about the U.S. withdrawal from the Iran nuke deal?
Well, I don't think this is surprising, because obviously the Trump administration has been signaling this for the last at least 6 months. As for people who don't know, this is a deal that's it wasn't really just the U.S. and Iran. You had some European nations in there as well, and they are still technically in the deal. Perhaps, maybe if they can cobble something together, something like the TPP, the U.S. withdrew. It doesn't necessarily mean the TPP is over. The U.S. withdrew from this nuke deal. It doesn't necessarily mean the nuclear deal is over, but obviously this was an important part of it. As I say, it's not particularly surprising, because we've known for several months that the Trump administration has been telegraphing that they won't recertify this deal, as the president was obliged to do every, I think, 3 months under the terms of this deal. They had to recertify that Iran was in compliance. Now they are not going to, or he has already indicated that he's not recertifying the deal, even though there is, as I say, no new information to show anything even close to the fact that Iran is not complying with the deal. So that, I think ultimately this just puts the credibility of the U.S. as a negotiator very much on the table. And it's hard to see how any country is going to take them particularly seriously after this type of abrogation of an major international treaty like this, that by all accounts truly has been one of the most comprehensive nuclear restrictions ever placed on a country. It's almost unfathomable that the U.S. would just back away from this. There are people who are still saying, well, maybe this is just some sort of negotiating tactic to get them back at the table for a more comprehensive deal, but I don't even imagine how that's possible at this point, especially because it seems the only diplomatic channels that have been opened have been diplomatic channels through the back door with John Kerry, who obviously isn't even in power at this point, who is apparently making secret meetings with the Iranian foreign minister at the UN. This is not the way, obviously, to cobble together some sort of new deal. So it just seems that this has been an extremely ridiculous, disastrous move. And, of course, the ultimate immediate effect of this is raising of tension in the region. And we already see that playing out with now Israel claiming strikes from Iran in the Golan Heights, and now they're going to counterstrike. So this is already having the perhaps intended effect of increasing military tension.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be here.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. If you have any questions for James or any of our other guests, or for the show, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.